Hello and you're welcome to the Big Tech Show with me, Adrian Weckler. Today we're going to talk about crimes in car design, as well as what's happening in the wider electric vehicles market. Now, last week, Ford launched or relaunched the Ford Capri. But instead of being the exciting, lust-worthy, affordable sports car we saw in the 1970s, it's a middle-of-the-road, small, bland SUV that's almost indistinguishable from anything coming out of China. So forget Bodie and Doyle, forget the professionals, forget anything you'd want to really save up and buy, and say hello to just any old SUV. Clearly the Nigels and the Sandras from accounts just couldn't resist sinking the badge of a beloved, iconic car. Derek Riley, Partnership Director with Nevo and who runs the Nevo Review YouTube channel, which I think at this point is probably the most viewed native electric vehicle review channel in Ireland. Derek, what was Ford thinking?
Yeah, they have a history of this, Adrian, where they take nameplates from their history, like the Mustang Mach-E electric, and then you had the Ford Explorer recently launched as well, where the North American market would know the Explorer as a large SUV. This is very much a smaller one. And with Capri, they've taken a nameplate that was beloved by a number of people, and they're horrified with what they've turned into an SUV.
And like, there's so much to talk about here. I mean, it is possible, I suppose, that this is the segment that sells. Small SUVs, medium-sized SUVs, particularly when you're making an electric car, you want to really maximize your chances at sales. But my God, couldn't they have just called it something else, like the Ford Galaxy or anything else? Why use the name Capri?
I think because it does have a name recognition, and they really do want to. With these large new electric vehicle companies coming from places such as China that don't have that legacy, if they're a Chinese home brand, and don't have that name recognition, at least when you say to somebody the Capri, and across all of my socials, when I launched the video and talked about the car launching, 90% of people were giving out about it, but maybe that wasn't the audience because 10% of people were going, I like the look, I like the space, I think this might be my next car.
You see, there are two different ways of looking at it. If I look at this car as just being, a Ford SUV, an electric car, I'm thinking, yeah, it's okay. It looks okay. If you tell me it's a Ford Capri, if you hype it beforehand and tell me that Ford is relaunching the Capri, my God, I'm disappointed when I see it. And now I'm just thinking, oh, Ford's desperate. They're absolutely desperate. They've got Eric Cantona trying to sell it with a hashtag of Je suis Capri. I looked on Twitter for Je suis Capri as a hashtag, okay? In the 6 days that since it's been launched, normally you would expect thousands of instances. It has 29 mentions, 24 of which are from Ford dealerships, and half of the rest of them are given out about it.
So the legend is not back. Is that what you're telling me, Adrian? Whether it's Eric Cantona or the Capri?
And Eric Cantona, he has his collar up with a Je suis Capri because he used to put his collar up for Manchester United. The whole thing is just kind of cringeworthy. And you mentioned Chinese companies there. I mean, you could say maybe the same for MG. We've talked about MG cars before. They're affordable. They're a good entry into the EV market. If you're looking for something and not looking to spend, 45, 50 grand, always have been. But they've taken the name MG. Like I grew up, I learned to drive in an MG BGT. My mother had one, right? Another iconic British sports car. Wasn't a great car, but it looked great. It had loads of imagination. And now what is an MG? An MG is basically the deals EV that you can buy. It's the most affordable, but also the blandest electric car you can buy. Like, is this what we're up against? In 10 years' time, are we going to see, Ferrari hatchbacks, Ferrari branded hatchbacks?
It's definitely a case of what do we give? Do we give the market what we want, or do we give the market what they want? And so there's an element of are we making massive profits on SUVs versus, and with the Ford, they were kind of on the back foot, and to catch up, they've gone to partnership with Volkswagen. So the platform in underneath is the same as your ID3 MEB platform, Adrian. And so it is just a different body shell on top of it. But as you say, it's kind of becoming same.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at others' reactions to this, and Looking at Luke Wilkinson as deputy editor of Parker's, which is a well-known review site. And he says, to my eye, it looks like someone's crashed the front half of a Honda Civic into the rear of a Volkswagen ID.5. And he's not entirely wrong, because it basically is an ID.5, isn't it?
Yeah, same coupe shape. So ID.5, Skoda Enyaq coupe. A lot of people are comparing it to the Polestar 2
Yeah.
with just an extra bit of steroids to bump it up. So stylistically, it is starting to become very similar to a lot of other things. But I think on the road, the front grille and at the silhouette headlights, I think it will definitely be recognizable as a Capri of 2024 and 2025 on the road. Yeah, and I think the yellow is definitely going to stand out, but they do have some other colors. I think it will. It's a talking point, Adrian. And if you're in marketing, is any PR bad PR if we're having a podcast about it?
Well, I don't know the answer to that question. You may have a point that the fact we're talking about it is good, because if 5 people listen to this podcast and you think, oh, I didn't know Ford had a new EV, I might go and have a look at it. And if 2 people buy it, from Ford's point of view, you're right, that's very positive PR. But from my point of view, from others' point of view, I now have an association, a growing association in my head of Ford with blandness and mediocrity. Okay, in terms of car design, not the cars, not the physical performance of the car, in terms of the design of the vehicle, in terms of aspirational. Ford is not a brand that I now regard as being aspirational or something that I'd be really interested in getting. Do you remember when we used to lust after cars? And maybe this is a thing of the 2020s. Remember, this must be the first decade where there's no car. Okay, maybe a Porsche or something like that. But the very few cars that you actually go, oh, God, I'd love one of those. Or am I wrong? Are there cars now that you can think of off the top of your head where you think to yourself, that is a beautiful, oh, I'd love to own one of those.
I was lucky enough to be in Goodwood last week with MG, the brand that we were speaking about already,
It's
and they
just
released
thrashing. Yeah, go on, yeah.
Cyber GTS. Yeah, so they released the Cyber GTS concept. One of the most beautiful cars I've seen in the last
Concept.
5 Lotus years. Were there, but Lotus were there. Their electric concept, but I think it's very close to being in production because it's very near their Cyberster, which is their gull wing door. Sorry, butterfly wing doors, coupe convertible that's going to be on Irish roads in a couple of weeks. And so they're not afraid of, do you know what? We're going to give people the first electric roadster. And as much as we talk about them, as you mentioned that they were the deals brand of EVs, they do have the more affordable stuff, but they also have, like, who's going to be spending €80,000 on a 2-seater sports car with butterfly doors? Bring them in, and they're going to bring them in.
Honestly, that's a really good question. And the answer to it is some people will. They absolutely would. There are people out there who have money to spend, who have 80 grand to spend on a car. We see it all the time because there's loads of Mercs and BMWs and high-end Audis and even brands like Lexus driving around the place. There are loads of them. There are people who will spend 80 grand, but just where is the design? Tesla, for example, we're still waiting for a Tesla Roadster. That was by far the most interesting looking car that Tesla ever suggested. Generated a lot of excitement. People put down payments on it. Where is it? Nowhere to be seen. Maybe is the greater problem here that just really interesting looking cars or imaginative cars, maybe they just don't sell. Maybe that's the market we're in. Is that where we're at maybe?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's a bit like movies. The backing doesn't go to the independent movies with a really good storyline. It's the superhero stuff because that's what brings the crowds in and that's what gets you to the cinema. And unfortunately, it's getting to the same way with electric vehicles. As much as we have that skateboard platform underneath with the batteries, do you know what? Because it's a battery and underneath, they want the height. And so they need it as an SUV. And so one is feeding into the other, unfortunately. And so, like, there's 100 different electric vehicles on the market at the moment, from the Fiat 500e all the way up to the Mercedes-Benz EQS SUV. So there are 100 different shapes out there. You mightn't think it in Ireland at the moment, but
would you say they're that different? I mean, I can think of. I will give credit where it's due. The ID Buzz, for example, the Volkswagen ID Buzz. To me, that is a fun design for a car. That's a minivan car that I would actually quite like to own. I drove one for a week. I tested it. It was nice. It was fine. But just the aesthetic appeal, to me, it does have aesthetic appeal, especially with that two-tone. My God, there are hardly any of them, though. There's so few electric cars, to me, that look, that go anywhere outside the shell of your standard SUV or standard BYD Tesla Model 3 sort of shell.
Yeah, unfortunately, and it's not just electric vehicles. If you look at the combustion engine side of the things, there are brands there in the top 10 sales in Ireland. And unfortunately, they're probably some of the most boring cars out there because people prefer boring. They prefer safe. That's why we don't have unusual colors for cars either. People like silver, they like black, they like white. You're not going to get the yellows and the greens and the reds.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, I have the list of the top selling 5 cars last year in Ireland. Here we go. Drum roll. Number 5, Volkswagen ID4, which functional SUV electric car. Number 4, Kia Sportage, small SUV, could be anything. Number 3, Toyota Yaris, very standard small car. Number 2, Toyota Corolla, even more generic car. And number 1, Hyundai Tucson, which I see loads of around the place. Functional, practical, little higher off the road, an SUV, utterly boring, but maybe that's what people want, as you say. I read a piece there from one of the American-born designer who was the chief designer of the Australian brand Holden. And so
Mhm.
he designed quite a few cars, and he had a rant recently about this. And his basic point was that today's stylists in car companies are relying entirely on computer design. So they don't make clay models as much anymore. They don't start with clay models. The vast majority of it, he says, is done and dictated to by their CAD computer design programs. And he says they're almost identical. He says if you had a line drawing of each one, you put one over the other, the lines would be no more than a quarter of an inch apart with the whole car. Now, he was talking about SUVs there, combustion engine and EVs, but he has a point, doesn't he?
Yeah, unfortunately, but again, it's people feel safer when they're up higher on the road. People think that they have more space in the back of an SUV, whereas we both know we're of a generation where estates were the car. If you wanted more space, and if you're buying an estate, be that electric or otherwise, you're going to get a lot more space in the boot for dogs or for packing or for luggage or whatever it may be. And so we're starting to see the estate starting to come back, which again, at least it's something different on the road, like the ID Buzz that you were talking about, Adrian, the Kia EV9, something else totally different on the road. So there are a couple of examples out there, and
So there are a few electric cars that I will definitely give their due in terms of design for trying. I mentioned the ID Buzz. I think the EV9 from Kia, I think Kia and Hyundai probably do a slightly better job than most of the other brands in trying to make their cars look, distinctive. The Ioniq 5, which one of the best-selling electric cars over the last 3 or 4 years, looks a bit generic now, but it was quite a futuristic design when it came out. Give them credit for that. And you mentioned Fiat, Stellantis. I mean, I don't really think that their Fiat 500 equivalent, the electric version, it doesn't look quite as good as the combustion engine version. But at least they're trying to keep the genre going.
yeah, for sure. And we've got the new Fiat Panda Grande that was launched last week. So if you remember the old Fiat Panda of past, I'd actually thought it was something to do with the cuddly bear, but it's actually to do with the Roman Empress Pandas. And again, I think it looks great, but it's starting to now. I think with that multi-platform across all of the groups, so the Stellantis group with Fiat, yes, you've got the same battery, the same four wheels, but in essence, let's do something different on the top of it because it is becoming very much. And Stellantis came out a couple of weeks ago and said, we're not going to sell any more grey cars. It's going to have to be a bright colour, again, to be a USP. So the shape, size, and colour are really starting to make a difference. And as much as the Capri, unfortunately, the nameplate and the naming conventions of electric vehicles, there are a couple of different themes within that as well. So some of them have gone with the I, whatever it may be, like Apple, or adding an E to an existing model, or changing a total sub brand like Mercedes Benz with their EQ range. And so it's understanding what the market likes and what it doesn't.